couple of comments about interacting with this webinar. GoToMeeting does not have the most robust real-time social features, and our community tends to have a lot of people who like to participate that way. So for those of you who want to engage in a back channel, the Twitter hashtag is DML badges, with the hash sign before that, DML badges. If you're participating by web, you can submit questions via the chat box. I don't think that you can raise your hands, or if you do, we'll have somebody who will respond to you. Okay, I was getting a lot of feedback there. I think I've just sorted it out. Just to go back to what I was saying, the raising your hands, I won't be able to answer your questions directly, but we have people who are monitoring the chat box. I also wanted to say about the questions and how we are going to handle questions. A lot of the questions that we have came by webinar, the webinar participants responding by email, and I also went through comments and blog posts and some of the questions on Twitter and combed through them and sort of categorized them into broad themes, and we'll be addressing them as we go through the webinar, and hopefully we'll get to yours. If we don't get to your question, we do have a URL to give you, and maybe we'll bring that up on the screen, our forum on HASTAC's badges group called Questions and Themes. That is a forum where you're welcome to participate. I'll be posting a lot of the content from the webinar in that URL afterwards. We'll also be archiving the webinar on dmlcompetition.net. in the blog, maybe not in the blog section, actually, I shouldn't say that. It will be on dmlcompetition.net for those of you who can't stay for the whole hour. We also, this is the first in a series of webinars on badges and the Badges for Lifelong Competition, and we have posted the schedule for the remaining webinar series on dmlcompetition.net. And that also is a good place to go if you're wanting to follow up on some of the next topics that we'll be covering. We're going to be doing, the next one is October 17th at, I'm going to say 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope I didn't get that. Also, we have one on the October 11th and 25th. For those of you who have questions that are specifically about the process and the application, we'll be taking those questions now if you'd like to submit them, but we'll be answering them in the later webinar. And one last comment before we jump in. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Erin and have her start driving. I just wanted to let people know, if you are planning on submitting something for stage 1 of the competition, the deadline has been changed to November 14th, and that information is on the timeline on dmlcompetition.net as well. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Erin Knight of the Mozilla Foundation. Erin is the Assessment and Badge Project Lead at Mozilla and P2PU, and she's going to take over and start talking about the Open Badges project.
Thank you guys very much. I'm excited to be here today. Let me share my screen. And I'm going to try playing this as a slideshow, so please jump in if you guys cannot see the slides. And we should see the first slide that says Open Badges, so maybe Sheryl, you can let me know if you're not seeing that. But yes, as Sheryl said, I'm here representing Mozilla Foundation and the Open Badges project, which spans quite a lot of efforts from kind of conceptual framework around kind of what we're talking about here with badges as an alternative pathway to kind of accreditation or credentialing, all the way to actually building a technical infrastructure, which I will briefly talk about today. But the main purpose of my presentation is really to kind of give a really foundational look at what we're talking about with badges here, kind of why we're even talking about this, and then give some examples of how we might see this actually working for learners in the real world. So with that, I'm going to jump in. Oh, and I guess another thing to note is some of you may have seen some of these slides from Mark Sermon's presentation at the September 15th announcement. But so if there's a little bit of a repeat, hopefully that's okay. But we'll go ahead and jump in. So what are badges? So badges are really, we're talking about here, digital badges. They're visual representations of skills and achievements. They can be in addition to skills and achievements, they can be affiliations, interests, competencies, basically a wide range of things that we can represent in these kinds of symbols that we can then carry with us. So the first thing you might think of when you think of badges, which many people mention, is the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts, and that is somewhat relevant here. Obviously, we've seen lots of examples of kids and youth earning
Hi, Erin.
badges.
This is Ruby.
Yeah.
Sorry for the feedback. We're getting reports that folks can't see your screen. It's gone black after the first slide.
Okay, let me see.
There you go. Thank you.
Great. It also seems like not everyone's on mute, too. I don't know if we can maybe mute everyone. Okay, let me just get back to where I was. Okay, so as we were saying, so basically scouting is the first example that comes to mind, and that's not totally off base given that these are kind of emblems or records that youth have earned for demonstrating various skills and competencies. But really what we're seeing is this whole idea is actually starting to expand and kind of grow through these digital badges that we're seeing online. So more and more we're seeing badges representing achievements on the web. And here's an example of Foursquare where many might be familiar, but people are earning things based on sort of moving around or checking in various locations. And these are examples of badges that are actually kind of more for fun or social status. And there's a lot of these too. But increasingly we're seeing badges emerge, or the concept of the same type of thing emerge around real skills and kind of real work and real interactions that people are having. This is an example of Stack Overflow where people are earning badges for participating in technical forums and earning actual badges that show that they know skills and that they're backed by the kind of work and answers that they've provided. And as I mentioned, so we're not only reflecting technical skills here, which are important, obviously, with things like you see here like CSS, jQuery, JavaScript, but also the social abilities and the social interactions, which are so hard to find and to discover and to represent anyway, and often are not represented through our kind of our existing accreditation systems. So again, these badges are covering a much wider range of real things, real interactions, real skills. And turns out employers are actually not only looking for this, but willing to pay for this information too. And this is a slight little tangent example, but basically Stack Overflow is now selling that information, that badge information, and employers are paying for that because it's actually giving them so much more context about these potential employees that they're looking at that they can't otherwise get to. So these are all examples of badges that are out there right now, but the question that we're all here to ask is, what if we use badges for learning? What might that look like? And there's some actual examples that are already out there that we can learn from. One is P2PU, which I'm involved in, as Sheryl mentioned. P2PU has basically is a peer, a open education peer learning environment. And they have a subset of courses called the School of Webcraft, which is a partnership with Mozilla. And that is basically free training on web development skills for kind of open web development and web developers. So we've been developing a badge system for that environment. And again, you see here we have both hard skills, traditional skills like PHP and JavaScript that people are earning by actually building code and sharing it and being peer assessed. And then there's actually a whole set of kind of what we call community or peer badges, which get to this kind of more softer skills, which I know is a dirty word in some cases, but really what we're talking about are the social skills, the types of things that really are going to help define how this person works in a workplace, and again, are not easy to kind of uncover in today's world. There's a bunch of after-school programs that are exploring this. One example is the iRemix, or Remix Learning, and their iRemix platform. And they basically provide essentially a network platform for a bunch of after-school programs around the New York and Chicago area. And they have an entire badge system that they've built in where kids are learning and demonstrating digital literacies within their environment and earning these badges that then are shared on their profile and shared, also shared back with schools. Museums and science centers, also a big avenue for informal learning. They often have lots of camps and computer labs and different types of activities. The American Museum of Natural History is one of the even more progressive, and they're already experimenting with badges. And again, they've built badges like the Navigator and the Explorer around some of the curriculum they already have to sort of extend those experiences and sort of capture the learning that's actually happening. Government agencies, where some of you may have seen that we're working with some government agencies in the DML competition as collaborators, but there's a lot of curriculum there and a lot of learning experiences and interactions that these agencies have been working on. And one example is NASA, which is probably something that everybody rings true with a lot of people. NASA has a wide range of different curricula, and one here is the virtual campus. They have a robotics arm. So they are exploring, actually starting to add badges around these experiences. So again, experiences are already happening, and in many cases, the learning is there, but we're talking here about kind of extending that and providing recognition for that, and giving people something that they can carry with them that means something. Another example is 4-H. So 4-H has an incredible curriculum, which a lot of it is offline right now, face-to-face, through fairs, et cetera, and they're moving a lot of that. They want to extend that into the digital world so that these communities and of youth can actually extend that value. And again, they're looking to use badges to do that. So one thing before we move on, all of these examples that I've talked about here, you can see are building on that scouting idea, building on that Foursquare idea, and going a little bit deeper. So it's not just kind of these what we might call frivolous badges or small badges, but there's a lot behind these. There's assessments, there's criteria, there's interactions, and there's learning. And so as we think about this DML competition, which is focused on badges for learning, we're really talking about kind of heavier weight badges that are really kind of, again, carrying this information and really just recognizing the learning that's already happening. But as we look at all of these examples, one question that I think we should be asking, and is certainly the one that we are asking, is what about if we thought about this even bigger? What about if it's not just about individual badge systems here and there that learners have to go into and still are sort of isolated, or their badges are still stuck in this environment? But what if we thought about this in a bigger way and instead thought of a badge ecosystem where all of this is working together? And when we think about that, what we really are talking about is we want to give as many ways as possible for educators to use badges to engage learners, to attract learners, to motivate learning. We want learners to be able to obviously get these badges and collect them across multiple different experiences and really kind of build this living transcript of these badges that demonstrate all of the learning that they've had, regardless of where it's happening. So again, letting them define their own pathways, making some pathways more kind of legitimate for them, and then also connecting all of that then again with the sort of end of the chain, the employers. So really helping people take the skills that they've learned through these different experiences and turning those into real results like job opportunities. So Mozilla, as Sheryl mentioned, Mozilla is building the Open Badge infrastructure, which is a piece of this Open Badges project, which is really aimed around supporting this kind of ecosystem that we're thinking of. So I don't want to go too deep or at all deep into the technical details right now. We can certainly answer some of those in the questions, but basically the idea is we're providing the infrastructure so that there can be lots of different badge issuers, and any given learner can earn badges across those issuers, pull them together in a single collection that they completely control, and that collection can be stored within this Mozilla Open Badge infrastructure in something called the Badge Backpack, and then they can share those out across multiple sites with multiple audiences. So they might share a certain set with social network and another set with potential employers. And so the idea is really to create this value chain from the initial learning experience, many of which are already happening, all the way through to get real results. And one thing to note is in this badge ecosystem, a badge is more than a badge. So we kind of started with the scouting badges and even the idea that a badge is just a visual representation. But really, again, we're talking about badges that have a lot more information behind them, and so it's important that the badge itself carries that information. So within this ecosystem, a badge is actually a set of metadata or information behind the badge that completely explains the badge. So it tells you who issued it, when it was issued, if it's expired, what the learner had to do to get the badge, how to validate it, those kinds of things. So, so again, the badge is carrying the weight around with it and the evidence with it as it goes. So why do we need something like this? Or why do we need this or something like this? So learning today looks very different than, I think, than what it was traditionally imagined. So, you know, for a long time, and even sometimes still today, you know, there's this concept of seat time, and it's basically the idea of just, you know, putting people behind closed doors or in a classroom is what we need to do. But really, that's not really what learning looks like today. And so some of that is because things have obviously changed a lot. We have more access to information. We have a bunch of open education resources, a bunch of kind of websites and repositories like Wikipedia that really kind of help us find learning opportunities ourselves. There's more opportunities to learn, and this is kind of a bunch of stuff thrown together, but again, you know, museums and institutes and various social networks, but also open education options and providers like Peer-to-Peer University or MIT OpenCourseWare, things like the Maker Faire. There's all kinds of informal learning that's actually happening to supplement the formal learning. But again, most of this it doesn't really count right now. It's not really formally recognized. There's no way necessarily for a learner to actually kind of carry that with them or have some type of recognition or evidence. So what we need is a way to recognize learning regardless of where it happens or how it occurs. So again, we want to support learners wherever they're happening. We want to really play up that interest-driven learning and make it count for learners. And we also need a way to capture all types of learning. So learning actually, there are actually lots of new skills and types of learning that are out there, like digital literacies and 21st century skills. And so we want a system that can recognize those and can be flexible for all of the new skills that are going to come even in the future. So that's kind of where the justification for how we ended up with badges. So again, like we want a lightweight system that's still robust enough to really capture this learning where it's happening all across the web, all across experiences, all across various channels, even if informal or formal, and really allow the learner to pull this stuff together and have, again, like a living transcript made up of these badges. And one thing obviously here to note again is it's not just about the badge, it's about the stuff behind the badge. So the note here of plus assessments, the sort of meat behind the badge is also equally as important. So what are some examples? I'm going to move through these pretty quickly because I don't want to spend too much time. I'm sort of running out of time. But these are some learner stories, and they're actually on openbadges.org, which I'll show the link at the end. But so you can go and read them a little bit more in depth. But they just kind of give you a quick insight to sort of how this might play out for different types of learners. So this is Eduardo, and he's very active in his local learning network, which is an after-school program, where he has developed a bunch of digital literacy skills making movies about his local community, as well as a bunch of robotics skills within this program. But he's seen as a very mediocre student at school. So his teachers don't know how to challenge him. He seems kind of uninterested, and they often, they just kind of think of him as mediocre. And so the idea is if he could earn badges in that after-school program, he can actually carry those back with him to his formal education classroom or to teachers, and they could actually see the skills that he's developed. They could find ways to challenge him, actually have him help teach students, etc. So you can actually bridge that gap and help him take his interest-driven learning back with him to the formal education realm. This is Sarah. She's a web developer, and she's been developing websites since she was 13, and she's now 18 and is getting kind of pressure from her mother to go to college, but all of the curriculum around web development that she sees in the local colleges is pretty outdated, and she has all of these skills that she's learned and but can't get a job because she doesn't have that sort of stamp of the undergrad degree. And so if she had been able to earn badges, or she could earn badges across those experiences, maybe she took some open education classes, maybe she just has various people vet the work that she's done. She could have, again, this living transcript that she could use on a resume that actually are the types of skills that employers are looking for anyway. Jen is an artist who has developed quite a lot of kind of reputation and notoriety in her local community, but she's moving, and so she's kind of worried about if she's going to be able to sort of make it or break into that new community. So again, here's an example of if badges were sort of issued within that community and that reputation was more formalized, she could actually carry that with her and bootstrap her entry into the new community. Sal is a parent of two who recently got laid off and is also at the same time, while trying to get a job, trying to switch careers. And so he has this very, very vast set of job experience that right now he doesn't really have any kind of evidence of, and he also has a bunch of skills that he learned in his old job that he thinks are relevant to this new discipline. But again, his resume is not very well received because he doesn't have the exact experience or the education behind it. And so again, badges could help show that he has a wide set of skills that are relevant, and could also, if he looked at other people's badges in the new discipline, help him see the stuff that he needs to actually learn himself to get into the new one. And finally, quickly, Karen is a hiring manager, which many of us might have been in this position before, where we get a flood of resumes and you can only make so much sense of them, and you have a 30-minute interview and you're trying to get to all of the meat and juice around, is this person somebody that I can work with and is going to fit in my team, and it's often impossible to do. And so again, with badges that have both hard skills and soft skills, we can get kind of a much clearer picture or story about the people that we're looking to hire. So how can you get involved? Obviously, we're here today talking about the DML competition as well, and we're looking, the point of the DML competition is really to bootstrap this ecosystem that we're talking about with really high quality badge systems and badges around learning. And so we certainly encourage all of you to get involved. And again, openbadges.org is the Open Badges Project website, and there's a bunch of resources there, so I definitely recommend that people jump in and check stuff out after this call as well. And with that, 3 minutes over, I will hand it back to, should I hand it back to Ruby?
Hi, can everybody hear me? No. No. Yes, okay, sorry. It's Sheryl. Thank you, Erin, that was fantastic. I always learn something when I'm getting walked through the Open Badges project, and I hope that gave everybody an idea about what it is that the competition is built on. We've been getting quite a few questions coming in while we're talking, so I'm going to move through some of the stuff that I had intended to cover as quickly as possible so we can get to the questions. So one thing I wanted to do, and I'm going to be introducing Cathy Davidson shortly, so what I first wanted to do is just go through some of the larger themes that have been coming up in the conversation, and then invite Cathy in to address some of the questions in more depth. So we'll be going back and forth as I talk about some of the themes, and I'll be interspersing that with some questions from Cathy. So a question that came in that I thought addressed a lot of questions that I had sort of put together as a composite was a question from a webinar participant. What are the associations that members of the public have with badges, both the traditional kind, scouting, military, and virtual? And I think that's a great question to start off with. One of the things that was really apparent in reading the blogs and listening to people on Twitter is that we really are working in an area of metaphor when we're talking about badges, because people tend to associate open badges, as Erin is talking about it, with whatever familiar reference that they have. And so I went through looking for some of the explicit and implicit metaphors that people were working with, and unpacked those and started to look at how people are using them. And I think that this is going to help people as they're trying to conceive of design implications for a badge system, to ask yourself what kind of use of a badge is it that you're planning to implement. So one of the things that became clear, and this is, again, looking at over 100 of the blog posts and the comments and the Twitter stream, everything that people have been saying, one of the things that became very clear is that when we're talking about badges, we really have to emphasize the open aspect of this, that we really have to be talking about Mozilla's open badge infrastructure to make sure that we don't get into this realm of thinking that we're just instituting another credential system, because there certainly are plenty of them out there that are working in informal spaces and working to credential things so that people have additional things they can add to their resume. So the open aspect of this is really what makes this different. And I want to emphasize too, when I've talked to people both offline and through email about some of the things that makes this such an exciting opportunity, is that we're really building this out of the open web and out of the open source idea of what can happen online. And you really have to be thinking about crowdsourcing when you think of that. This is going to push people, I think, to be thinking about this competition in a way that is going to, you are going to be right in the same innovation category that we ourselves are in, and in that there's not really a lot that you're going to be able to compare it to. And you're going to have to be thinking about your own experience in the 21st century, what it means to be social and connected and networked, to be mobile and to be participatory. So in terms of thinking about what open badges are, it also invites you to think about what it means for the people who are interacting with your organizations or how you interact with your learners, to be thinking about it in those ways. And I'm going to quote something from Cathy's book, that crowdsourcing is the single most common principle behind the creation of the open source web. So that is feeding into the open badge system. And when we're talking about badges and we're comparing it to 20th century systems of credentialing, we're going to miss a lot of what is special about the opportunity to do an open badge system. So to be thinking about what it means to demonstrate what you know, what you make, what you do by what you contribute, how you participate, how you convey your public self-presentation, how you give and receive feedback, how you collaborate, how you manage your time. Cathy can talk more about this, how you pay attention, how you find information, what networks you belong to. Those are all very distinct things that we do in the 21st century that's really different than what we did when we were going to school when we were kids. And we're asking for people to be thinking about open badges in this 21st century type of environment. So one of the things that I noticed in reading over the blogs is that people would use badges in ways that would sort of replace different kinds of credentials, whether it was grades or rewards or gold stars, things like that. And so that will be the real challenge, I think, for people to start thinking about badges a little bit less in terms of the metaphors that we're already familiar with and more in this new ecosystem that Mozilla has made possible for us. So one of the things I wanted to do as well, answering the question about how the public perceives, is to just look a little bit at the word badges. And I noticed in looking at, I sort of tried to keep count a little bit very informally, the different kinds of ways that the bloggers were discussing badges, and assessment, evaluation, commodification, gamification, credentials, rewards, incentives. All of these tended to be words that were associated with badges. The original meaning of badges had to do with membership and affiliation. It was a way of, in a very non-numerical, non-alphabetical representation to show your membership with a group. So it really had to do with identity. We're asking sort of to focus that a little bit again with badges in the 21st century. Of course, we have to take into account what badges have meant before in the past. We've used badges to represent immaterial qualities. I think this is a thing that we've done for a long time, and I think it also gets to the heart of the conversation people have about commodification, that we don't want to take soft skills that are very complex and reduce them into something. But when we're in an online environment and we want to present ourselves online, we need to have something that does it in a way that allows people to drill down not just at the physical representation, the visible representation, but also, as Erin was saying, to some of the portfolio type of examples like Stack Overflow uses to show what people have achieved and what skills that they've accomplished. We also know that degrees were used as a social badge if you went to college, and we certainly have seen a lot of that in the blogosphere. People are talking about badges and degrees and credentials, and I would say of all the things that seem to show up, that tends to be the most exciting for people, is the idea that you could become accomplished, you could have skills that you are acquiring from somewhere other than a university, which is expensive and slow to change. And so there's this exciting idea for people that we could go as big as offering an alternative form of credentialing. By the 1970s, we started to see badges were becoming something that got associated with branding, and I think this is where we start to see the very beginning of the gamification conversation, in the sense that badges became popularized as an idea of an extrinsic reward, and certainly in gamification being blended in with both entertainment and advertising, not with gamification, but the idea that advertising and entertainment would be interested in badges, I think says a lot about what it is that makes badges powerful. And so in many ways, when people are talking about gamification, it has a lot to do with the power of badges, and not so much that we're not trying to create a competition that gamifies a learning experience. I guess what I'm trying to say is that badges were here first, and the reason that gamification and advertising have picked them up is because they have for a long time been extremely powerful in conveying a lot of information: identity, membership, reputation, also being able to represent something that's immaterial, and then also having status involved as well. One of the other things that came up that was pretty typical is the comparison with Boy Scouts. So Boy Scouts, college degrees, and gamification, those seem to be the three major areas that people tended to make comparisons. And the Boy Scouts I find to be an interesting one. The merit badge system is pretty well known. I did read that it took 140 hours to create the robotics badge, and I think about 11 months, and I'm not sure how many dozens of leaders inside and outside of the Boy Scouts in order to make that happen. And one of the reasons I think it's an interesting model is it's very structured. It's a very obvious design system and a lot of thinking that's gone into it. I want to go back to what I was saying earlier about thinking in a 21st century way, that when you are comparing badges to the Boy Scout system, if you think about what the internet makes possible, a different model of doing about Boy Scout merit system would be to invite the Boy Scouts in to decide what they themselves found to be valuable, something that they might want to have as a badge, and a system that they would go through, a process that they would go through collaboratively with peers in order to assess and decide this is how we want to have our system work. So those are two different ways of thinking about the Boy Scout system, and those are sort of the different things that we're exploring. We're looking at it from a very traditional, very structured, very top-down, but also very valuable system to what the internet might be able to make possible based on the kinds of skills that a lot of our youth and a lot of us who are working have to do in just a regular day's work. So one of the things that I'd like to do now, I'm going to move on to the second part of a question that was sent in, and I'm going to introduce Cathy and talk a little bit about the book that Cathy has written, because the next question has to do with how are badges thought of relative to other forms of validation, reward, and assessment. And Cathy has been on a 50-city book tour. I think that is growing, so that might be a low number for the past while. Cathy has over 10 years, I know for certain, it might be longer than that, experimenting with different kinds of assessment in the classroom, thinking about it, writing about it. And chapter 4 of the book that she's on tour right now with is how we measure. It's in Now You See It. And Cathy can talk a little bit more about what it is that she covers in that chapter, but I think that Cathy's probably the better person to be answering the question about badges in terms of how they're relative to other forms of validation. So I'm going to throw that question to Cathy and have her answer the question. Cathy, I'm sorry, I think Cathy's probably figuring out how to become unmuted.
Hi. Okay, I'm unmuted. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Can you hear me? Can anyone let me know if you can hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. So the most common sort of certification that we know now is grading. We tend to think of grading as if it's universal, but it's actually only been around and used in universities since 1890. Mount Holyoke was the first university to use grading. That was in 1897. They went to an A, B, C, D grade. And then the second institution, just a second. The second institution to use grading was the American Meatpackers Association. Interestingly, if you go back into the archives of the American Meatpackers Association, you find that within a few years they found this system way too static. So, So what they did was they actually gave away ABCDs. They said it was way too static a system for grading sirloin and chuck. Now, ironically, when the American meatpackers downgraded the ABCD standard as too rigid, at the same time the educational system thought it was just fine for evaluating students, and it spread like wildfire throughout education. Sorry, I think we're having some feedback issues here. I hope everybody's eardrums haven't been blown. So when people are talking about badges, they're talking about badges within a very set ecosystem. We've had the last 100 years telling us that there's really one way to grade. And it's not just A, B, C, D grading, but very set rules about what is graded and what is credentialed. This comes in the form of the classes that are divided up in very static ways, which also happens at the end of the 19th century and again for the industrial age. It also happens in the form of the kind of testing that we use most often, which is typically multiple choice testing. That too gets invented in 1914, actually to deal with a crisis. It was during World War I when men were at war, women were in the factory. There were immigrants coming into America in huge numbers, in record numbers. Congress had just passed laws requiring 2 extra years of higher education. So Frederick Kelly out at the University Kansas State Teachers College, invents the multiple choice test specifically to test lower order thinking because he's modeling it on the Model T. He says if Henry Ford can produce Model Ts on an assembly line, we should be able to produce students on an assembly line as well. That's not a very complex system, and it doesn't begin to grade and credentialize, and more important, recognize all the different ways we learn and all the different skills that we have, whether as kids or as adults. For me, one of the most exciting possibilities in this experiment we're doing, and I really want to emphasize that this is an experiment, and that means it might fail, it might succeed. It is an experiment, and we're doing it to see what we can learn. But one thing we're trying to learn is what more fluid, flexible ways are there for thinking about all the things that count in an organization. For me, one of the most exciting things that's going to happen will be one of the most exciting things will be when organizations themselves look inward and think about, as peers, think about what do we think matters, what do we think counts. It doesn't have to be just math, art, physics. It might be such things like, wow, this person answers questions brilliantly, or this person always is a fire starter. They're the person that gets ideas going, but they're not so great at implementation. Another person is good at implementation. These are all different social skills that are important for making things work. And what's important is for organizations to decide themselves, the peers and members of an organization, to decide collectively what counts and to create badging systems that really reflect their own values.
Hi, everybody. Cheryl, I was trying to unmute myself there. We've got a lot of questions coming in. I'm not sure that we're going to have time to cover everything, so I'm going to go through some of the ones that have just come in. For Cathy, we've got a question about how badges and intrinsic learning and intrinsic value of getting a badge. How do you see that working with learners? The question exactly is, how do you focus people on the intrinsic value of the learning instead of the extrinsic value of getting a badge?
Well, you know, that's the same question you could ask of any system that results in a kind of credentialing system. And what we're hoping is that organizations will think about exactly that issue. Think about not just the external outcome, but the motivation they themselves want from the system. So, for example, I believe, I mean, you know, this is, I talk about this and now you see it, I'm dyslexic. So I learn in a very, very unconventional way, and I often learned from other people. There was no way growing up that there were ways that I could give credit or reward to those students who took time to explain things in a way that I understood. On the other hand, if I were that person giving the advice, I would not only want credit, I would not only want be happy about doing it, it would be great if that were one of the things that traveled along with me, as one of the things not only that I did, but that inspired me to think of that as a category that I could improve. I mean, I hope some of those people that helped me when I was young went on to be teachers, because they were incredibly gifted people. But there was no way the system could give them feedback that would say, wow, you are a really gifted teacher. So in other words, if the system itself is complex enough, and if the categories are complex enough, they're not only motivations for learning, they help to categorize certain kinds of skills that might not otherwise be visible to the learner himself or herself. That to me is really important.
I'm sorry, everybody. It takes a couple seconds to unmute this on this system. It's Sheryl again, and I have another question here. This one is for Erin, and this is another great question. Is there a badge standard? Are some badges worth more than others based on who issues them? And there's a similar question. Who determines when someone earns a badge, or that badge or badges from different issuers are equivalent?
Yeah, this is a great question. So basically, as Cathy said, you know, this is an experiment. We are building this ecosystem together. So, so in terms of, is there a badge standard? You know, how are we going to find out if things are worth more than others? There isn't a badge standard at this point, and I guess there's two. I should distinguish between two definitions of the word standard. So there is a badge standard from the technical perspective, which basically with the open badge infrastructure ensures that all badges are sort of look the same, have the same data behind it. So that just ensures that badges are interoperable and can be shared across the ecosystem and sort of used interchangeably. But in terms of what this question I think is really asking is, you know, is there some gold level standard of what we think a good badge is? No, actually it isn't. And there's a wide range of what a badge can be. There's a wide range of the types of value that it might have across that chain. Now, obviously through the DML competition, again, and through a lot of these efforts, we are talking about badges for learning, and we are talking about badges that we hope are going to lead to jobs, you know, maybe education credits and other types of advancement. And so there are considerations that can go into those badges. So things like Cathy was talking about with assessments, with kind of that rigor, robustness behind the badge that is important when we're thinking about badges on these levels, or we're trying to make badges that are going to kind of carry that weight. So that's something that we're sort of hoping to work with all of the educators, all of you, all of the people out there considering building badging systems around, really kind of, you know, exploring what that looks like and how to make these kind of really robust badges. And again, as I said,
Erin?
Yep.
Oh, excuse me. I
Yes.
didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry about that.
No, please.
I was just going to add that we've also had 100 years to think that standardization is high standards.
Right.
And that's a very bad confusion in our society. And one thing I'm excited about for the badge competition is precisely that there's interoperability in the sense that you can carry badges from one to another, but you can also click on the badges and find out the who, what, where, when, why, and how about a specific badge, so they don't all have to be from the same place, issued by the same people, and using the same criteria. We don't have to reduce, and it is a reduction, high standards to standard to one simple standard. The badges can have a complexity that's as complex as the various worlds we live in.
Exactly. Well put.
This is Sheryl again. I've got a couple of other questions. One that I think probably will be good for, and thank you, Cathy and Erin. We're struggling a little bit with the technologies. It goes along with doing a webinar. So anybody out there who's had a painful webinar experience probably understands. So I wanted to also go to another question, and I think this is a good one for Erin. It would be really helpful to get a basic definition of open being used in the open badges. There's an assumption that people in the audience speak the same language when we talk about open, but let's talk about open in the perspective of how the open badge concept would be different than other learning validation paths.
Sure.
And that's for you,
So, yep. So I think, yes, being from Mozilla, we might take for granted that that everybody's meaning the same thing about open. So thank you for asking this question. basically what we mean by open badges, there's actually several things. One is, again, looking at that infrastructure that we're building to support the ecosystem. We're building it in an open way so that there can be many, many different issuers on one end that are pushing badges into this ecosystem, and then many, many kind of displayers or consumers on the other end that are pulling badges out. So the ecosystem itself is open and allows kind of the flow of badges and different types of badges through the system. So that's one meaning. The second is that the badge collections that these learners are earning are open in terms of they have complete control. So this is not a proprietary system. These badges are not going to be locked down or sort of either forced upon them or on the other end that they're forced to use them in a certain way. This is a completely open system with them at the middle. So again, it's allowing them to earn badges across their multiple experiences and really controlling that, owning and controlling that badge system as much as possible. So those are really the two kind of meanings that we mostly mean when we're talking about open in open badges. Again, we are Mozilla, so everything we do is open, but it is really about letting this ecosystem grow and be open to lots of different types of badges, and also be built around the learner controlling their own badges.
Thank you, Erin. One thing I'm noticing in the questions that are coming in that people are interested in seeing examples of this being used in classrooms, so maybe a little bit more of a process-oriented white paper or something that gives people an idea about how to approach it in their own situations. Instead of going through those one by one, especially since we have so many questions that are coming in, I'm going to post that in the forum, the badges group on HASTAC. I'll go ahead and post links to some of the different examples that we have found. There are not that many that have been published, and I can't speak off the top of my head if it's peer-reviewed, but we do know that Global Kids has done some work in this area. There's a researcher, Amy Bruckman, who's done this in a constructionist learning environment. So I'll go ahead and post those resources for people who want to see something and take a look at a closer example how this might work in a classroom setting. I see that I've got some other questions here. This may get to the idea of badges, maybe unintended consequences or perhaps not. Do badges get awarded for negative or neutral behavior? Cathy, maybe that's one that you might want to address.
Sure. I've been using alternative systems in my teaching. I don't always use badges, but I use different ways of students, peers, giving feedback to each other when they are peer teaching. And we don't use negatives. We just found that negatives too often led to trollishness and discomfort, and instead what we do is we give positive numbers. It amounts to the same thing, because if someone's got 40 points and somebody else has 5 points, you don't need to have said what was negative. You just know that the person with the 40 points is doing something quite extensive. On the other hand, that's just how this has worked for me. I think that, and I know Topcoder does something similar where you award positive points rather than negative. But I think the whole point of this exercise is for the organization to define what works best for them, to work as peers collectively to find out what works. And some organizations might well think that there's some reason to actually use negative as well as positive criteria. But the point is self-examination, self-assessment for your own needs as peers within a system.
Thanks, Cathy. One thing I wanted to point out, we had said it was going to be 15 minutes to do the webinar, and for those of you who are right on schedule, I just want to let you know that we're going to take the questions that have come in, and we're going to post them in the forum, and Cathy and Erin and I can do our best to answer them, make sure that people get what they need. We're going to continue asking questions right now, but for those who need to go, I'll be putting those up in the forum on HASTAC's badges group. So I've got another interesting question, and I think actually it might be interesting to have both Cathy and Erin. Erin, maybe you want to take the first stab at this. Somebody has written that badge issuing reminds the questioner of SSL certification. How do we deal with revoking badges or issuers, a chain of trust issues? And maybe you can also talk a little bit about just trust and privacy in general. I know that some questions that came up from the emails that people sent in for questions had to do with what kinds of privacy and issues of trust and security would be built into the open badge system.
Sure. Yeah. So issues of trust and privacy are kind of yet another reason why something like the open badge infrastructure is kind of a really important piece of what we're trying to build here, because again, if we just had kind of standalone badge systems that weren't working together, or even worse, if we had badge systems that were kind of hacked together without kind of some consistent way to, and some kind of consistent view of that kind of value chain in that ecosystem, there's a lot of risk there, because obviously if this is as successful as we all, or many of us, think it could be, we're talking about pretty critical identity information here that the learner is going to obviously want to protect. So the open badge infrastructure is absolutely taking steps around privacy. All badges are, again, the user is the one that owns the badges. They basically log into what's called their badge backpack, and only they log into it and they see their badges. All badges are defaulted to private. They can set those to public, which allows them to be discoverable by kind of consumers of badges or displayers, but they control those completely. They also control who they want to share those with directly. So through the backpack, they can decide to share with specific partners that we're working with, like Inside Jobs or various displayers that have essentially registered with the open badge infrastructure. There's also several things built into the infrastructure around trust. One is an authentication layer or channel where anytime I try to use a badge, again, that badge is carrying all that metadata that explains the badge. And so anyone, a displayer or someone trying to understand that badge, can actually, through that metadata, call back to the issuer and say, hey, issuer, did you in fact issue this badge to this user on this date, and is it still valid? Has it expired? And get a response. And so they can actually find out if the badge is a real badge and if it's still valid quite easily just before they even decide to actually display that badge or use that badge. And then the other piece is that we're building essentially, as you mentioned, SSL, we're building an endorsement system where you can actually have third parties or other organizations sign other badges. So P2PU might have MIT or Mozilla sign their badges, and essentially that's just more information that's carried with the badge, but again, it's more information to sort of understand the value of the badge and add this trust layer in there where we can start to sort of kind of compare badges to each other and have a little bit more information, again, when trying to decide the value of the badge.
Thanks, Erin. I think we're close to wrapping up, and I have to say, just looking at the questions and the discussion that is being piped to me, that I hope a lot of people in the audience are planning on applying, because these are great questions. And I want to point out, too, and make sure everybody knows that there is a research competition as well, and you can find that information on dmlcompetition.net. And if this is the way that a lot of people are thinking, and again, I'm going to post these questions, and we'll do our best to answer them in the forum, but to ask one more question, and then we'll probably have to call it quits at that point, and hopefully you'll get a chance to go through the questions as we have done and share them. I've got one more question here, and I think this is a question that probably will come out in the research that comes to us from the competition. This idea of stratification and possibly having badges become something that divides even more so the participation gap. So does this system mean that people who are doing digital skills have greater chances at whatever sort of social capital these badges give them than somebody who does not have access to the internet? Will we likely be seeing some sort of participation gap widen? And Cathy, that's probably a good question for you.
I think that on the one hand, that's a quite valid question. I mean, this is a digital media and learning competition, so we already have an audience of digital that is involved in digital literacy, but it's an educational experiment. So part of the other motivation of the competition is to see if we can help improve digital literacy. So there's a kind of a meta badge that's going on here where we might actually be able to motivate more people to certain kinds of literacy skills precisely because of this kind of a system. So the ideal would be inviting more people into the system rather than greater stratification. Right now there is stratification. This might give more impetus to schools, to after-school programs and others to be part of what is inevitably the 21st century, and it's not going to go away.
And I will say, too, that one of the examples that I'll be posting online is very much about hands-on in the classroom skills using a badge system. It seems to me that it doesn't have to just privilege or preference digital skills, but certainly the place where they'll live will be online in the Open Badges ecosystem that the Mozilla Foundation is building. I think we're at the end of our time together, so I'm going to wrap it up and thank Cathy and Erin for participating. Thanks to everybody. This is our first run through, so we've got some good ideas for next time. Again, check the competition website, dmlcompetition.net, for a schedule of the upcoming webinars. We'll be archiving this one, and I'll also be taking people's questions that have come in, and we'll be putting them on the forum so that you all have a recap. And thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing your applications and hearing from you in the competition. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Think big, think imaginatively.